Hello students, today we will see the 7th part of our series on styles and movements, and we will be looking at something that brought a major shift in architecture at the end of the 20th century, and that is Deconstructivism. All of a sudden buildings were being looked upon completely differently to what we were used to. We were used to buildings that were symmetrical, coherent, having a certain form and shape, or even if they had asymmetry, that form and shape was still there. We were used to buildings even if they had playfulness, like in the buildings of postmodernism, or even if they had ornamentation. We were used to buildings looking a certain type. Even if the building was as high tech as Centre Pompidou, there was certain reason, certain rationale behind it. But all of a sudden we had buildings that seemed as if they had been blasted and put together. It seemed the very principles of geometry that guided buildings had been completely altered and completely rethought. Actually, the difference in looking at architecture and architectural geometry had already begun way back in the constructivist movement in Russia. Artists who called themselves suprematists and the constructivist architects whose work I had shown you a while back, they were experimenting with such forms which were very radical and very abstract. So but because of the Soviet Union, because the movement was from there, it did not gain that kind of speed as modernism did, and modernism at that time became the dominant movement. The forms of modernism, with their functionality, with their simplicity, with unornamented facades, etc., all the elements of modernism and the buildings they produced became the buildings across the world. Though again the rebellion happened against that, and we had late modernism and postmodernism, late modernism intensifying modernism, postmodernism going against modernism towards looking back to history and ornamentation, etc. But then we have deconstructivism, and somehow again we have somebody looking back to trying to make the geometry very abstract and very different way put together the building. So we begin by talking about this movement. It began from the 1980s, and it challenges the concept of harmony, coherence and order that we see in all architecture. Here the buildings are instead, they are fragmented, they are chaotic, they are unpredictable, but we do realize the chaos is actually very precisely planned. And it breaks away from all traditional design rules. I would say it breaks away from all traditional rules of geometry also in so many cases. The term was made popular in the 1988 MoMA exhibition, which was curated by Philip Johnson and Mark Wigley, and they gave the title Deconstructivist Architecture. It is opposed to order and rationality that we see in late and postmodernism. It is a confrontational stance to architectural history, wanting to disassemble architecture. It rejects postmodern acceptance of historical references, the idea of ornament as an afterthought or as a decoration on the building. It completely rejects that. Thus, its main characteristics are buildings that are irregular, with sharp angles, with no parallel walls and have unexpected forms. Deconstructivism avoids symmetry and traditional proportions that we normally see in other buildings. Deconstructivism as a term, like I said, first appeared in the 1980s, and the idea developed further, or rather I should say the initial idea was developed by the French philosopher Jacques Derrida. This idea of fragmenting building and exploring the asymmetry of geometry, which comes from Russian constructivism, while maintaining the core functionality of space within the building, which comes from modernism. I will repeat that again. Two things together, the idea of fragmenting the building and exploring the asymmetry of geometry, which is coming from Russian constructivism, while maintaining the core functional concept of space within the building coming from modernism. So if we look at the key features, there is fragmentation. Broken forms seem to be exploded or disassembled. Non-linear shapes avoiding predictable geometry. Surface manipulation, which surfaces are skewed or twisted shapes. There is disorder and tension, apparent randomness and chaos, but a controlled chaos. There is no historical recall, unlike in postmodernism. There is a visual complexity achieved through a very rigorous design process. These are some of the examples like the Guggenheim Bilbao and the Walt Disney Concert Hall by Frank Gehry, and manipulation of the structure, surface, skin and creation of non-rectilinear shapes which appear to distort the elements of architecture. The visual appearance normally is that there is a lot of unpredictability about it and there is a controlled chaos. Deconstructivism carried forth by a number of architects around the world, architects like Peter Eisenman, Frank Gehry, Zaha Hadid, Rem Koolhaas, Daniel Libeskind, and we have Bernard Tschumi and the group of called Coop Himmelb. Both of these architects are a part of that group, though in many cases these architects reject the label deconstructivism that has been given to them. These are some of the examples of deconstructivist buildings, and a few of them we will be looking at. The UFA Cinema Center, the most famous deconstructivist building in the world that brought about what came to be called the Bilbao Effect and the rise of star architects called Starchitects, the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao by Frank Gehry, the Seattle Central Library, again a very famous building by Rem Koolhaas in Washington, the Jewish Museum by Daniel Libeskind, and the Rosenthal Center in Ohio by Zaha Hadid. All of them iconic buildings in their own right. The key architect, if we were to say who is the key architect behind deconstructivism, automatically the name Frank Gehry comes in front of us. Frank Gehry, in his buildings, they seem that they have been exploded or have been crushed, but they are still functional. The Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, Spain is one of Gehry's masterpieces. Metal forms are twisted and clashed together in unexpected ways. What are the tools and technology that is used in this building? In early deconstructivism, the architects were using physical models and drawings and not computers. Later on, they brought in digital tools to help them create these complex shapes. So, the complex shape of Guggenheim, the complex shape of the Weizmann Art Museum in USA by Frank Gehry in 1993. I had earlier mentioned to you that one of the things that I am parallelly doing as I teach you this subject is I am showing you a large number of buildings, architects, where these buildings are, the year of their completion, so that you get a great vocabulary of buildings that you can consider or you can refer to or even study deeper once you have seen them on these slides. So, one of the things I am doing is I am bringing in every kind of style and its related building that you can then study. Here is a timeline of the iconic deconstructivist buildings. I am sorry the font size is too small, but you can read it later. It includes some really famous ones like the Wexner Center for Arts in Columbus, USA in 1989, the Guggenheim Bilbao in 1997, the Vitra Fire Station in 1993. It has the Walt Disney Concert Hall in 2003. It has the CCTV headquarters made for the Beijing Olympics in 2008, the Maxi Museum of 21st Century Arts by Zaha Hadid in 2010. So, these are some of the ones that there are others also. This shows you the chronological timeline of the construction of these buildings. Now, when we compare deconstructivism with postmodernism, because some people say that deconstructivism came out of postmodernism, but we do find that there are very distinct differences between the two. Origin is postmodernism 1960s to 70s, deconstructivism, if coming out of postmodernism, follows it in the 80s and the 90s. Postmodernism was an anti-reaction against rigid modernism and aimed to introduce ornamentation, playfulness and context, even double coding into their buildings. a certain historicism into their buildings, but in deconstructivism it is focused on fragmentation. The visual style postmodernism is colorful, playful, historical references and mixed styles. Deconstructivism is angular, distorted, fragmented and anti-historic. Philosophy, postmodernism embraces pluralism and symbolic form, local culture, whereas deconstructivism challenges meaning, structure and order itself. It challenges the very basis on which buildings have been created for such a long time. So examples are Piazza d'Italia and the Portland building which we saw earlier, and the examples we will see today are the Guggenheim Bilbao and the Jewish Museum in Berlin by Daniel Libeskind. Now in deconstructivism, they do not separate ornament and function like it is done in postmodernism. Functional aspects of buildings are also questioned. Geometry to deconstructivist is what ornament is to the postmodernist. There is a very complex geometry applied to the functional, structural and spatial aspects of the building, like this Vitra Design Museum in Germany in 1989 by Frank Gehry. Now, the primary visual effect, when you look at their building, look all the elements of the building, they have been hacked apart and then put together again. That is the usual visual effect we have when we look at this building. The walls are distorted, the roof, the interior volumes, the envelope of the building, all are distorted, all are then put together after hacking them, but it is sure that there is a controlled chaos, or rather I can say there is a method to the madness. The movement has a huge impact on contemporary architectural design, and it has forced people to look at architectural drawing also in a completely new way. If we get an opportunity later, I will describe to you how fundamental changes happened when Zaha Hadid fundamentally started looking at drawings differently. I have often opined that all the major revolution that happened in modern architecture happened in the beginning of the 20th century with modernism, international style and the subsets like minimalism, etc. The kind of change that came then has not been replicated again. Mostly it has been a progress or a further growth of what modernists had done, and better technology, better tools that we have today have made those kind of buildings possible, but foundationally modernism is what is the revolution. But I now start realizing that these architects of deconstructivism, people like Frank Gehry and Zaha Hadid, have brought about the new revolution in the 21st century, because they are fundamentally looking at buildings and building geometry completely differently. This museum, the Vitra Design Museum in Germany by Frank Gehry, takes, again relating it to white aesthetic, it takes the typically unadorned white cube of modernism or late modernism, the art galleries, and deconstructs it. For example, here is the Burda Museum in Germany by Richard Meyer, a classic late modern white aesthetic museum done by him. So let's take this house, the Villa Savoy. It takes the white aesthetic, Frank Gehry, he takes it and he completely deconstructs it. He overthrows the functional aspects of the modernist simplicity while taking modernism, particularly the international style, the white stucco outside surface as the starting point. So we find the white aesthetic in the Vitra Design Museum, just as you would find it in modernism and later on in late modernism. We would say that Villa Savoy seems a cuboidal simple volume and Richard Meyer works seems more complicated. I had a discussion with you when I was talking about the works of Richard Meyer like the Smith House, but when we come to deconstructivism, the story changes completely in terms of the amount of complexity that has been brought into the building. So when we come to the Wexner Center for the Arts by Peter Eisenman, what does he do? What does he do? Something that a postmodernist would do. A postmodernist would take the symbolic form of a castle and build a building like that, and you would look at it and you would be able to recollect the castle. If you remember a building I showed you which had a lighthouse in it, and that was symbolic form for a lighthouse. It was obvious that this is a lighthouse. So here below what you find, these two pictures are an example of a renovated hotel which was earlier a castle, but it has been renovated under postmodernism to be this castle hotel. It has a different name, but this is the hotel here. But what they do in deconstructivism is they take the typical castle and add complexity in a series of cuts and fragmentation. So they take the castle, the edges of the castle, and they just split it apart completely. They split it apart, and without such transformation, what it would have been, it would, had this transformation not been done, then this form would have been a symbolic form representation of a castle as in postmodernism. But in Wexner Center, not only has Peter Eisenman done that, he has also taken columns which are going nowhere. They are just hanging in the air and don't reach the ground, hovering over the staircase, creating a feeling of unease. Anybody walks under it will feel uneasy, and it contradicts structural purpose of the column, because such a column really has no structural purpose. The center deconstructs the archetype of a castle with disjointed forms and encourages people to engage and enjoy it in a dynamic way. Introduces many familiar devices of deconstructivism, such as fragmenting of forms that came to define so much of deconstructivist architecture in the late 20th and early 21st century. What is fragmentation of form? Simply put, it is the breaking of buildings shape into pieces. Then they look irregular and disconnected, but are carefully designed to work together in a dynamic way. That is, they are showing motion or indicating motion. When you look at this building, for example, the Lou Rovo Center for Brain Health by Frank Gehry, it is this fragmentation of form put together in this controlled chaos, and it is indicating dynamism or motion. Now, let us talk of one important aspect of deconstructivism, that is CAD, without which these buildings couldn't be possible. And that is one of the reasons why this movement flourished when it flourished, when we had enough digital tools and technology available to be able to imagine and construct these buildings. The particular nature of deconstructivism makes the use of computers especially important. 3D modeling and animation conception of a very complicated spaces, while ability to link the computer aided design model with computer aided manufacturing CAM thus allows for mass production of slightly differing modular elements at an affordable cost. Because these modular elements are now being manufactured through CNC machines, those are computer controlled cutting machines, cutting tools. Therefore, for example, in the Guggenheim Museum, when you need titanium plates, this is a modular cut in a factory, but each plate is slightly different than the other because of the curves and the way the building shapes. The CNC is able to do that. It is able to modularly produce these modular elements, each slightly different from the other. And that is again because of this new technology, this combination between CAD and CAM, that this has been made possible. Many early deconstructivist works were not conceived by computers. For example, the Vitra fire station by Zaha Hadid, it was not conceived by a computer. But Gehry noted that for producing both physical models, computer models, they are a part of his design process. Though computers have made design of complex shapes much easier, not everything that looks odd can always be called as deconstructivist. Let's come to the Guggenheim Museum, Bilbao. It's hard to pin down, it's luminous and shape shifting. It seems almost to ripple in the sunlight with the reflection of the Nervion River. The original design and construction used a computer aided 3D tool called CATIA. CATIA is a software tool that is used by the Dassault Aerospace company, and this tool was taken from them to be able to conceive the Guggenheim form. The Guggenheim is covered in titanium panels that resemble fish scales. So, if we see the process of the design, first the physical model is made, iteratively it is refined over many versions. The model is later digitized using CATIA for 3D modeling and engineering analysis. Coming to CATIA, it produces the virtual building, the digital representation from the physical model for fabrication data, that is CNC files for cutting the titanium panels. This approach is key for thousands of uniquely shaped elements with minimum error. What I just mentioned before, that in the CNC, modular elements with slight differing from one another are then produced. Then the third comes is what is called as the digital project. It was also a 3D software tool that he developed post CATIA, and this allows for seamless information flow between design engineers, fabricators and contractors. It supported BIM-like workflows well before BIM had become mainstream. So, in this method, starting from the physical model, developing the virtual model and the fabrication data, evolving it through CATIA, then using the digital project to complete the entire project. And because of their mathematical intricacy, the twisted curves are designed through CATIA, allows for complex designs and calculations that were not possible earlier. You see these amazing curves all through the building. CATIA digitizes the points on edges, surfaces and intersections of the hand-built models to construct the on-screen models that can then be manipulated as animated cartoons and generate the fabrication data. The walls, the ceilings are load bearing. They contain an internal structure of metal rods that form grids with triangles. So, you see here there are these grids with triangles, grids with triangles, grids with triangles here. CATIA calculated the number of bars that are required for each location as well as the bar's position and orientation. The walls and ceilings have several insulating layers and the outer layer is that of the titanium plates. Each piece is exclusive to its location and that has also been determined using CATIA. Now, the exterior titanium metallic form looks almost floral when we look at the aerial view and almost looks like a boat when we look at it from eye level. It is constructed of titanium, but it is also having limestone and glass. If you look at the building very carefully, you will find that in certain parts there is the presence of limestone also, because its seemingly random exterior curves are designed to catch light and react to the sun and weather. So, the fixing clips make shallow central dent in each of these very thin titanium tiles. Surface appears to ripple in changing light and give an extraordinary iridescence to the overall composition. That is one amazing thing about the deconstructivist building. Because of the many curves and edges and angles, the light, the way it falls on the building, it produces a very unique kind of light and shadow effect of the building. Also, there is a large light filled atrium organized in the center of the museum, 11,000 square meter of exhibition space, which is across 19 galleries. 10 of these galleries have classic orthogonal plan and identified on the exterior by this limestone finish that you see here. The remaining 9 galleries are seen from the outside with titanium cladding, the largest gallery being 30 meters by 130 meters long, and here is a permanent installation called the Matter of Time. The socio-economic impact of this building was amazing. In the first 3 years, it brought a profit to the city of Bilbao to the tune of 500 million euros. Furthermore, because of hotels, restaurants, shops and transport, over 100 million euros were got in taxes, which offset most of the more than the cost of the building, and continues to provide amazing revenue to the city of Bilbao. And that is why it says that it led to what came to be called as the Bilbao Effect, the desire of various cities across the world that we should have one such iconic building in our city, which probably could then lead to the same kind of socio-economic impact that this building has caused to Bilbao, and for that we need a star architect like a Frank Gehry, like a Norman Foster, like a Richard Rogers, like a Zaha Hadid, like a Daniel Libeskind to do that project, and many more. And these star architects, when they do that project, that city acquiring that project gains the same effect to happen in their city. So you could think of Heydar Aliyev Center in Baku, Azerbaijan, you could think of many other buildings like that. So because of the Bilbao Effect, the building boom in statement architecture happened across the globe and the rise of star architects, but the museum remains an iconic structure renewed for its complexity and its form. Let us come to the UFA Cinema, another remarkable deconstructivist building by Coop and Himmelb team. This design is characterized by two interconnected building units. One is the cinema block, which has got 8 cinemas and seats 2600 people in this side, and the other is the crystal, which is the glass shell which serves as the foyer in the public square of the building, which is on this side. So here is the cinema block, which is much more simple compared to the crystal, the foyer block, which is far more complex and attached to the main block. So here is the UFA Cinema in Germany with the cinema building and attached to it this glass block. And then we have the Jewish Museum in Berlin by Daniel Libeskind in 1999. Now conceptually, this building has got a lot to do with symbolism. Though it is deconstructivist, yet it brings in a lot of symbolism, because here Libeskind expresses the feeling of emptiness, the feeling of invisibility that happened to the Jews and to the Jewish culture after the Holocaust of the Second World War that was done by the Nazis in Germany. Some of you do not know, who are much too younger, during the Second World War all Jews were to be exterminated completely. That was Hitler's modus operandi, that is what he wanted to do, and the Nazis rose up and decided to exterminate them completely, giving rise to Holocaust. And because of this process of extermination, 6 million Jews died in Europe at the time, a large number within Germany, in Poland, other areas where Germany had attacked and occupied the countries. And this museum is a reminder of the terrible atrocity. The architecture here is a narrative, an emotion, providing visitors with the experience of this effect of the Holocaust on both the Jewish culture and on Berlin. The form has been abstracted from the Jewish Star of David, and it stretches around the site and its context. Here, through a process of connecting lines between locations of historical events, the form has been created, providing a structure for the museum. The lines are squeezed into a zigzag building form. As you see here, there is a zigzag building form created. There is no formal exterior entrance to the museum. You enter the new museum from the old Baroque style museum in an underground corridor. And the interior spaces are extremely complex. Not only are they complex, they create a feeling of unease, they create a feeling of loneliness and isolation. The promenade that has been created through galleries, empty spaces and dead ends, a significant portion of the museum does not have windows and difference in materiality to create and exaggerate the feeling of isolation and loneliness. On the exterior, there are not proper fenestrations but these gashes that have been made. There is the zinc clad facade with these narrow irregular gashes which show the rupture of the Jewish culture and the community during the German Holocaust. The distorted oblique views that we see through the fenestrations from inside, it just increases the feeling of isolation and shows the separation and displacement of the Jews through this tragedy. When you enter the museum, this is a schematic, it shows you 3 pathways. One is called the axis of continuity, the other is called the axis of exile, and the third is called the axis of the Holocaust. The axis of continuity takes you to the exhibition galleries, which symbolizes the flow of history, that this is how Jewish life continued also. The axis of emigration, rather axis of exile, you can call it the axis of emigration, is those who were forced to leave Germany. This leads to daylight, leads to this garden, the garden of exile, because they started living in exile, or they emigrated. For example, they did it to America, and therefore it is a matrix of concrete boxes containing willow oaks inclined at an angle of 12 degrees, that is to give the sense of disorientation and instability the exile would feel in a new land, having been cut off from his original land. And then of course there is the worst, the axis of Holocaust, that takes you to a dark dead end where there is the Holocaust tower. Along the path there are objects belonging to the Jews that were killed by the Nazis, and this indicates the ultimate tragedy of the Jews who died in the concentration camps. So these three divergent axes intersect. The connection shows the three different stories played out for the German Jews. There was continuity, some went into exile and immigrated, and the others, they perished in the Holocaust. The Garden of Exile in the Jewish Museum in Berlin, this is the Garden of Exile. You can see that these columns are inclined. Interior empty spaces, dead ends where only slight amount of light enters, but this small amount of light actually gives a ray of hope. In the darkest moments when there is no escape, the light restores hope. So again there is symbolism. Then something very emotional and powerful is a 66 feet tall void with concrete walls, a cold atmosphere. On the ground there are these 10,000 coarse iron faces that you see here, symbolic of those people lost in the Holocaust, just completely astoundingly showing you the pain and the sorrow they have gone through. There is a lot of symbolism in the building, therefore the building is less a museum and more an experience depicting what most cannot understand, the struggle that they had to go through. Then we come to the Vitra fire station in Germany by Zaha Hadid. Now the Vitra company had a major fire in 1981, and they commissioned Nicholas Grimshaw to design the new factory hall. He developed the master plan on the Vitra grounds, and the Vitra factory company decided different architects would make each different building project and instill the site with vitality and distinctive identity. As a result of that, on this campus was built the Vitra Conference Pavilion by Tadao Ando, Design Museum, Vitra Design Museum by Frank Gehry, Vitra House by Herzog and Dimiro, Vitra Production Hall by Alvaro Siza, Vitra Fire Station was Zaha Hadid, all top-notch architects who did this work. Something similar to what happened in the Wiesenhof Siedlung project when I talked to you earlier during modernism. This is the Vitra fire station by Zaha Hadid, unusual shapes and angles typical of Zaha Hadid's work. The fire station is an icon of deconstructivism. It is constructed as a working firehouse within the Vitra furniture and design manufacturing complex. Now it is used by Vitra as a showplace to have a permanent collection of chairs within it. This is the interiors, again the interiors of the Vitra fire station. And then we have the CCTV headquarters, the largest project of Rem Koolhaas or OMA, and first major building in China, more than 470,000 square meters of TV studios and broadcasting areas. It is the reinvention of the skyscraper as a loop, and according to OMA, the CCTV is designed as an alternative to the very exhausted typology of a skyscraper. The skyscraper's typical quest is to achieve ultimate height. Here what it has is, it's rising from a common platform. There are two towers that lean towards each other, and then they merge at the top in a perpendicular 75-meter cantilever. Design combines the entire process of TV making formerly scattered, of a TV production formerly scattered in various locations across the city into a single loop of interconnected activities. In the structure on the web of diagonals, you can obviously see from the very outside where the loading is, where the web is dense, there is greater stress, where the web is dense, and where the web is loose, the stress is less. And thus these are the interiors of the CCTV tower. And the other examples are the Seattle Central Library, again by OMA and LMN, the Fano Science Center in Germany by Zaha Hadid in 2005, the Denver Art Museum by Daniel Libeskind in 2006, and the Rosenthal Center for Contemporary Arts by Zaha Hadid in 2003. Thus, in a small way, I have just covered with you a movement that has produced some of the most iconic buildings of our 21st century, and it continues to move forward, and amazing buildings are still being made with the idea of deconstructivism, moving on to parametricism, which we might be able to talk later. Thank you.